All right. Well, welcome once again, monthly lecture series. This is our fourth one of this year and our 10th one overall, so we're coming up on lapping the year here. Tonight's lecture is going to be on Alexander the Great, and I had a lot of fun doing some research on this. I got to fill in a few gaps in my own understanding of how all these things fit together, and I am going to spend some time trying to give you both the context at the beginning for where he comes from, and also a look downstream at the impact and the significance of what he accomplished in such a short time. So, let me introduce you. We are, of course, here as a lecture sponsored by the Francis Schaeffer Study Center, which was founded in 2004. Its mission is to promote a biblical worldview through the study of history, literature, and art. And it is named for the influential theologian and apologist Francis Schaeffer. And there's some pictures of our students at the bottom, because in addition to sponsoring this lecture series, we also offer a high school program, which is built around an integrated chronological study of Western civilization. Begins with the ancient world in 9th grade and brings the students through history up to modern times by the time they graduate. And if you are watching this video on the Francis Schaeffer YouTube channel, I will respectfully request, please hit like and subscribe. They're free. They don't cost you anything to subscribe to the channel. And if you do that, you'll get a notice when we post a new lecture, which we're trying to do at least once a month. And I'm trying to intersperse some other things as well. And it also helps us continue this lecture series. It lets YouTube know that there's some interest in these topics. And down the road, it may help us generate a little bit of revenue. And as I say, it's completely free to subscribe. And if you like it, hit like. That helps us as well. So I am Rob Shearer. My wife and I founded the Francis Schaeffer Study Center along with 4 or 5 other couples 20-something years ago, 20-plus years ago. We've been married for 47 years. We have 12 children, 21 grandchildren. And I haven't quite decided what I want to be when I grow up. I still have a couple of possibilities open. I am, however, a graduate, undergraduate, and graduate degrees in history. It's been the great love and passion of my life. I've written a couple of books of biographies, and I have been teaching history for over 30 years now. And I constantly read books about history. I try and stay up in the field about what's going on. So as is my wont, what's one thing you already know about Alexander the Great? He was great. Well, yes. Bucephalus. I'm going to talk about Bucephalus. That's his horse. It's a great story about his horse. There is a library in Alexandria. He didn't found it, but he founded the city, and then one of his generals took over the rule of Egypt, and he founded the library. Yeah. Actually, he founded a bunch of cities, and he named them all after himself, except for Bucephala. When the horse died, he had a tomb constructed for the horse, and he named a city after the horse, which unfortunately did not survive with that name down to modern times. But okay, well, here we go. I'll give you an outline of what I'm going to do here tonight. It's in 5 parts. I'm a root stretcher. I always like to go back and say, what's the context for this? How did we get here? So before we start on Alexander, I'm going to give you a quick overview of Greek history, ancient Greek history. I'm going to talk about how we know what we know about Alexander. There are 4 major sources from the ancient world about him. We have lots of details about his life. They reference a whole bunch of other sources that unfortunately have all been lost. And I'll talk a bit about them. We know they existed. This is one of the great illustrations of the difficulties and hazards of doing ancient history, is we often have an ancient writer who quotes something from another book, and that book has not survived. It's astonishing how much of the ancient world did not make it for us to continue reading. So we'll talk a bit about that. I'll give you an outline of his life, his birth, his education, his conquests. It's easy to do because he dies young. but he accomplishes a lot. I'm going to give you 3 anecdotes, and the first one is about Bucephalus. The second one is about one of his very good friends, although he was sort of a generation older, 19 years older than him. Depends on whether you're English or American. If you're American, you say Clitus. If you're English, you say Cletus. And his connection to Achilles, which is quite interesting and not very much explored, not left out of most of the short little snippets you get in general Western Civ books. But Alexander connects himself to Achilles, and there's a very interesting detail or two about that. I'll talk about the consequences downstream from Alexander's conquest of the Persian Empire and what that means for our next lecture next month. So, the oldest event in the history of ancient Greece is the Trojan War. There used to be some skepticism about whether it ever actually happened, but that has been dispelled because the archaeologists have found the remains of a city that was destroyed by fire about 1200 BC. So it turns out Homer might have actually been talking about something that happened. Maybe not all the details about the intervention of the gods, but that the Greeks went to war with the city of Troy is pretty well established. And then after the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, we got nothing. We got nothing for about 400 years. We don't really know. It seems as though even the warriors and the leaders of the Greek expedition to Troy were probably not kings in the way we think of them in the Middle Ages or more modern times. They were more like village chieftains. And they were really fairly rural in all of their ways, and they assembled together to go try and get Helen back. The Greek city-states start emerging in the 8th century. The 8th, 7th, and 6th centuries, you get the founding of Athens and Corinth and Thebes and Sparta, although Sparta is a little bit outside the range there. This coloring on this map, I know it's awful small, but shows the areas where city-states developed in the purple and the areas that remained largely rural agricultural in the sort of tan coloring there. And Greece remains a very agriculturally based society between the ocean and the small family plots. The geography is very rugged. The south is disconnected from the north. There are very, very difficult, treacherous roads. And then when you get up along the northern coast of the Aegean, there are some tall mountains. Mount Parnassus is at about 6,000 feet, and Mount Olympus is at 9,000 feet. They both have ski resorts on them. You don't think about being able to go snow skiing in Greece in the winter, but you can. And so they influence the development of Greek civilization. The other thing I like about this map in terms of the shading is it shows you that it's not just the peninsula, it's also the islands in the Aegean and the coastline of Asia Minor. Those are all Greek cities. It's all the Greek civilization. So it occupies both sides of the Aegean with a whole scattering of islands down to the largest island, which is Crete in the south. After the city-states get themselves organized and they each experiment with different forms of government, they're not all democracies like Athens. Sparta has a couple of kings. Thebes has an oligarchy. But what begins to unify the separate Greek cities is the threat of conquest by the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire has expanded out of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley and all the way over into Asia Minor and begins threatening, actually taking control of some of those Greek cities on the coastline of Asia Minor. And then Ahasuerus, Xerxes, launches an invasion to conquer Greece in 490 BC. There are two invasions, in 490 and 480. And the 490 invasion is stopped at the Battle of Marathon. They land on the coast, just on the sort of the southeast corner there. The lower map is the second invasion. And unload their army, and the Athenians rapidly mobilize and arrive at the battlefield and don't even wait to attack. And although they're outnumbered probably 2 or 3 to 1, the Athenian army disrupts and forces the Persians to run for their boats and head back. And so it's this huge victory, and that's the victory that leads to the 26-mile run by Phidippides from the battlefield to the city of Athens to announce that they've won a great victory. The race is called a marathon because the name of the place where the battle was fought was Marathon. 10 years later, the Persians tried again. This time they came by land. They marched, they crossed the Hellespont and crossed across the top of the Aegean, down the Greek peninsula. They got halted briefly at a mountain pass where the coast road, just at the top of the island of Euboea there, it's right to the right of where it says Thessaly and Aetolia. There's a little road that has to go between the mountains and the coast, and it's called the Pass of Thermopylae. And the Spartans send a body of 300, and they oppose, well, depending upon who you read, Herodotus says there were 1 million Persian warriors. He's probably exaggerating just a bit. But there could have been 100,000 versus 300 Spartans. And the Spartans stage a sort of Alamo-like last stand. They are all wiped out. In fact, their tomb has an inscription on it that says, go and tell the Spartans that we lie here at their command. All 300 of the Spartan warriors were killed, together with their commander, Leonidas. But it gave time for the other Greek city-states to mobilize. The Persian army actually occupies Athens and burns the Acropolis. The Athenians have taken to their fleet, and the Persian fleet sails around and loses a huge battle to the Athenian galleys at the island of Salamis that was quite a surprise. And then there is a second battle on land that the Persians also lose, and they withdraw now for the second time. But those two events, in 490 and 480, really shaped the Greek conception of their own identity. And of course, the Persians are the enemy, the other, the invader that has to be repelled. You never got a unified political state out of it. The city-states came together as allies, but they never joined up politically. They're so isolated from each other geographically that it really wasn't practical. But in the aftermath, there is eventually a civil war. Half of the cities ally with Athens, half of the cities ally with Sparta, and there's a 27-year civil war from 431 to 404 that's very costly, very bloody, very debilitating, very wasting of the resources throughout the city there. And you get, on this map, you'll see Macedonia for the first time labeled up there in the north. It's an ally of Sparta, but it is off in the hinterlands. It's north of Mount Parnassus, north of Mount Olympus. You have to go through some rugged mountainous territory. It's very difficult to get to. And the rest of the Greek city-states kind of look down on the Macedonians as those hill people who are not really very civilized. They're sort of the thugs of the ancient Greek world. It occurred to me this week that in terms of the relationship between the Greeks of the Lower Peninsula, the Thebans, the Athenians, the Spartans, it's sort of like the way the English feel about the Scots. They kind of speak the same language, but they're basically just redneck, dirt poor farmers. But you don't really want to mess with them because they're mean and they're bad warriors. I mean, bad in the sense of, they fight. So that's kind of the situation. You have these urbanized areas in the south and rural hardscrabble farms in the north. Sparta wins the civil war. Sparta conquers Athens. Athens goes into decline. Sparta enjoys a hegemony, which is just, they predominate, they never unite things, for about 30 years, 40 years perhaps. And then they are defeated in turn by the city of Thebes, which is north of Athens, that area there in the yellow. For about 10 years, Thebes dominates all of the other cities. And meanwhile, things are cooking up there in the territory of Macedonia. They've expanded all the way over to the Adriatic and a little bit to the north. And so they actually eventually conquer the rest of Greece. And the king of Macedonia, King Philip, then forces all of the other cities of Greece to pay tribute to him and acknowledge him as their king. So from 359 to 336, he is the king, and you see the tan area is the sort of core area of Macedonia, and the slightly lighter shades is territory that pays tribute to the king of Macedonia. Alexander is his son. Philip dies in 336 BC. Alexander, at the age of, I think he's only 18, becomes king of Macedonia. So here's a map of the empire. There's the Macedonian Empire. That shows a better picture of how far they have actually extended their territory to the north, all the way up to the Danube. So Macedonia and Thrace, and it gives the Greek names, Mare Adriatica, Mare Ionium, Mare Internum, Mare Aegeum. Yeah, that's the situation when Philip dies. He's actually killed at a wedding feast. One of his disgruntled bodyguards, whom he dismissed, showed back up and drew a dagger and stabbed him and killed him. So how do we know what we know about Alexander? Well, the oldest existing biography that we have is actually from about 280 years later. Diodorus Siculus wrote a library of history in 40 books, and 5 of those 40 books tell the story of Alexander. He mentions that much of his material comes from an earlier biography by Clitarchus, which is lost. We don't have it. We know it existed, but we don't have it. The next one to write a biography about 100 years later, 48 AD, Quintus Curtius Rufus writes a history of Alexander the Great in 10 books. He also relies heavily on Clitarchus. It was still around, and we don't have it. I have the Curtius biography over there in a good modern English translation. Plutarch does a life of Alexander. He's 105 to 110. He's Greek, but Greece has been conquered by Rome, so he's Greek but a Roman citizen. He's traveled in Rome. He's fluent in both Latin and Greek. He has access. He pulls in and quotes other sources. Alexander did have a historian who traveled with him. Onesicritus was one of his naval officers. They built a fleet to get back home at the end of the conquest. Clitarchus again. And Plutarch actually quotes a number of letters drafted and sent by Alexander, all of which are lost. And the last major biography that almost everybody refers to is Arrian. Just a little bit after Plutarch, he writes the campaigns of Alexander, called the Anabasis of Alexander, in 7 books. He has the memoirs of Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander's generals, went with him on his expedition all the way to India and back. He also has the memoirs, he quotes from Aristobulus the engineer, and Alexander is rather unique in ancient history in using engineers who constructed bridges, did siege engines and ramps, and was taking advantage of all the technology that was available, and his engineer wrote his own account, which is lost. And I bring up all of that to sort of point out what I think is a striking contrast. Nobody really disputes the basic details of Alexander's life and career and conquest. I mean, there are a few details about battles and how he treated certain people and did he or did he not do this. But nobody really disputes that Alexander did the things that we have in our standard textbooks. And yet, the closest written account we have is 278 years after he died. But everybody challenges the biographies of Jesus. And we have those written within, we have Paul's letters, which were written within 30 years of Jesus' death, maybe 20. And I'm of the opinion, I've mentioned it before, and you can go check one of the other lectures if you're interested in this idea. I'm of the opinion that every single book of the New Testament is written before 70 AD. And we have fragments, and we have copies, and we have a great deal of confidence that the text we still have is the text that was written. So if you would imagine trying to write a biography of George Washington today without any primary sources, could you do it if you only had what was printed in textbooks? Or if you want to look at some of the larger gaps, that would be Diodorus. If you went back to, if you go back to Plutarch, now we're talking about having to write about the mid-17th century. That's the distance in time. Or if you want to do Arrian, imagine Arrian writing about Alexander. It would be like a 21st century biographer writing about Queen Elizabeth I. That's the distance in time. So, and still, we're pretty sure and pretty confident of all the details of Alexander's life. So let's talk about that. He's born 356 BC in Pella, Macedonia, or sometimes just called Macedon. When he is, remember, we got to go down here. So 356 to 343, he's 13. From the time he was 13 until the time he was 16, his tutor was Aristotle. His father was the king. He was the prince. His father recognized, by the time he's 13, the father has recognized, my son is actually rather bright, and I need to find the best teacher for him that I can. The best teacher was Aristotle. He summoned him, and of course, because he's king, he can pay an exorbitant, attractive amount, and Aristotle came and tutored Alexander in his teens for 3 years. In 338, he goes to war with his father. This is the war that establishes Philip's hegemony over all the other Greek cities. The Greek cities had united. Philip brought his army south from Macedonia. Alexander went with him and fought. He's 18 at this battle. And 2 years later, at 20, his father is assassinated and he becomes the king of Macedonia, and inherits his father's kingdom and its resources and its army and its officers, who are battle-hardened at this point. His first campaigns are north, as you might imagine, those territories that Macedonia had conquered up to the Danube River. They are not quite sure they're going to accept a 20-year-old king, and so there are some rebellions to be put down, and his first military campaign is to the north up to the Danube River and back. He's successful in all the battles there at 20 years old. He then campaigns south to the city of Thebes. Thebes had resisted and said, yeah, we paid your dad taxes, we're not going to pay you a dime. And he shows up with his Macedonian army, and they say, yeah, we're not opening the gates, we're not letting you in, go away. And he sacks the city and destroys it. And he goes from there across the Hellespont into Asia Minor and attacks the Persian Empire. He wins a battle at Granicus. He wins a battle at Issus, only 2 years apart, and they open up the Persian Empire to him. He doesn't actually kill the Persian king, but and the first battle is not fought against King Darius. The first battle is fought against one of his generals, but he wins a major victory. Second battle, Darius has showed up with his army. Alexander defeats him, and it opens up the Persian Empire for him. After that second battle, he moves south to Egypt. Because he has won 2 battles against the top Persian armies, Egypt, which had been part of the Persian Empire, just basically throws the doors open and says, fine, take what you want, we'll pay what you want, please don't hurt us. And he founds Alexandria. He goes all the way as far to the oasis of Siwa, where there is a temple of Ammon, and thereafter he calls himself sort of the follower of Zeus Ammon. He hyphenates them. He starts this syncretism. He identifies Zeus the head of the Greek pantheon, with Ammon, the head of the Egyptian pantheon. He talks from then on about Zeus Ammon and offers sacrifice to that, what he refers to as a single god. Third battle, 331 BC. He wins at Gaugamela. This is in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. He captures Persepolis, which is the capital of the Persian Empire. He's now got King Darius on the run, who's desperately seeking refuge and trying to escape from Alexander's armies. Darius III, the king he'd been fighting, dies in 330. Alexander campaigns all the way up into Central Asia. He had been following Darius as he fled up into what was then called Bactria, what is now Afghanistan. It's part of the Persian Empire. And then in the winter across the Himalayan passes to Samarkand in what is now Uzbekistan with his Greek Macedonian warriors. He comes back south to the edge of the Persian Empire, to the Hydaspes River, which is a tributary to the Indus, on the boundary with India. He wins the battle against an Indian king, and his troops say, hey, we've been doing this for 8 years. We want to go home. We want to find out if our parents, this is actually the phrase they use, we want to find out if our parents are still alive, and we miss our wives and children. And Alexander goes and sulks in his tent for 3 days. I think he's been reading the Iliad. And eventually comes out and says, fine, if you want to go home, I'll come home with you. But his plan at that point is to go home, raise another army, and then resume the campaign. He's heard about the vast riches of India across the Indus Valley. He knows about the Ganges River and the cities and the wealth. He wants to come back with another army and sweep the entire Indian peninsula. And then he's also talking about going into the Mediterranean and attacking Carthage, which is the major power on the north coast of Africa. And he's even heard there's a little upstart city in the Italian peninsula that's making some waves. He figures he'll pick them up along the way. At one point, he actually has from Greek geographers heard a description that the continent of Africa, that the ocean, the Indian Ocean, is connected to the Atlantic Ocean, and he actually says to some of his companions that he may build a fleet from the Persian Empire and sail down along the coast of Africa and circle that continent, come up to the Pillars of Hercules at Gibraltar, and then go home that way. So he's got some awareness of what the geography of the known world at that point looks like. He returns to Persia. There's a mass wedding between Greek warriors and Persian princesses. I think there are 80 weddings. He goes to Babylon and dies at the age of 32. Possibly of malaria, some sort of fever. Malaria, typhoid, dysentery, we're not really sure. Remarkable accomplishments, especially the early accomplishments when he's still in his 20s. Let me tell you a little something now. I told you I would give you 3 anecdotes. I want to tell you about Bucephalus. Here's the way the story goes. He's 12 years old, and a horse trader has come to bring horses, war horses, for his father to buy. And he's got a big black war horse that's the pride of his troop. But the horse is unmanageable. The black war horse, nobody can mount him. He throws everybody. He's skittish. He snorts. He tosses his head. He just won't be tamed, won't be. And Philip says, you're doing it all wrong. I can mount that horse. And he's a 12-year-old kid. And these grown warriors, part of the cavalry of the king, said, nobody can tame this horse. He's not worth a penny. Send him away. Alexander says, I can tame him. And he had noticed something. He had noticed that the horse was being spooked by its own shadow. That every time the horse saw its shadow on the ground, it shied away. And so he turns the horse so it's facing the sun, so the shadow is behind, talks to the horse calmly, calms it down, mounts the horse and rides off. And the horse is quite happy The horse, he and the horse bonded. He galloped off, and his father is a little afraid that the horse and the boy are not going to even come back at all. But Alexander turns the horse around, brings him back, steps off, and said, "I want this horse. Buy him." And Bucephalus became his war horse. From the time he's 12 to the time he's 32, for 20 years, Bucephalus was his horse. He rode Bucephalus in every battle. Tells you something interesting about him. And of course, this is before he's met Aristotle. It's not for 3 years later until he meets Aristotle. So Aristotle would have known Bucephalus as well. He rode Bucephalus in all 4 of his major battles. Bucephalus died in India, about 20 years of age, and was given a hero's funeral by Alexander. And I mentioned he founds a city and names it Bucephala. I wish it still existed. So why is Alexander able to accomplish what he does? How is he able to take on the much larger Persian army and win battle after battle? Actually, you have to go back and look. Why are the Macedonians, the rural thugs from the mountains, able to defeat the armies of the Greek city-states? Well, it's actually a technological breakthrough that they've had. The Macedonian army, trained and equipped by his father, because they didn't have the resources to buy swords that were as good or shields that were as good as the warriors of the Greek city-states. So Philip says, standard Greek infantry spears are 8 feet long. I want all of my warriors equipped with what they call the sarissa, which is a spear that is 18 feet long. And then he drills and drills and drills his warriors so that they can form up, overlap the spears, and not only hold the formation and protect each other, but then move as a single unit and advance on the attack. And what that looks like is terrifying. It's like being attacked by a giant porcupine. And you have an 8-foot spear, and the guys coming at you all have 18-foot spears. And before your spear can even poke them, they're into your first 2 ranks, are being speared and laid on the ground. And so the phalanx, it's not just the weaponry, it's also the training and discipline. But it makes the Macedonian army invincible. It's why they are able to defeat, why Philip is able to defeat the other Greek city-states, and why Alexander is prepared. And based upon what he has seen growing up and fighting with his father, he says, we can take this. Actually, Philip had made plans and apparently discussed with Alexander, we need to go take on the Persian Empire. And so here's that map. Here's what it looks like. You see up there in the upper right-hand corner, Macedonia and Athens and Sparta, who are sort of begrudgingly sending some troops and paying some gold. And you'll see there are 4 dates in bold. I've got a better map here in a minute here. So 334, 333, 331, and then there are 2 dates over on the right-hand side over the Indus Valley. But that's from Greece through what is modern-day Turkey, through what is modern-day Iraq, through what is modern-day Iran, through what is modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all the way to the Indus Valley. It's something like 3,000 or 4,000 miles. And over the course of 6 or 8 years, well, 10 years max. I've got some better maps. Here they are that highlight the location of those battles. And it shows you the boundaries, the little red line in the upper left-hand corner. Macedon and Thrace are both the territory that Alexander inherited. And the first major battle that he fights is just across the Hellespont. It's the Battle of Granicus, May of 334 BC, near the Granicus River. It's his first major victory. He confronted a Persian army commanded by regional satraps, and actually the Persian general is a Greek mercenary. The Persians positioned their cavalry on the bank of the river with the infantry behind them. Alexander launched an immediate attack. He led his cavalry across the river in a bold charge, drew the Persian attention. The phalanxes attacked the Persian line, and there's a huge victory. And it opens Asia Minor. The Persians had probably 20,000 infantry and 20,000 cavalry. Now, their cavalry was light cavalry, was not as well armored. Alexander had 12,000 infantry, but they were armed with a sarissa. 12,000 warriors, foot warriors in formation, and 5,000 cavalry. The Persian losses were some 5,000 to 6,000 killed out of a total 40,000 engaged. The Greeks lost 115 men. So it's like the Battle of Agincourt or the Battle of Marathon. It's just lopsided because of the tactics. And you can see its location. It means all the rest of Asia Minor. What's labeled there as Caria, Cappadocia, Cilicia, that province, which had been the furthest westward expansion of the Persian Empire, and it's now open to Alexander's army. So the second battle is at Issus. He's 23 years old, 333, a year later. This time it's King Darius, the great king, the great Persian king himself with his army. And the Persians now have probably 70,000 in their army, 60,000 heavy infantry, 11,000 cavalry. They outnumber the Macedonian army 2 to 1. The Persians lose 20 to 40,000 killed. The Greek casualties are 5,000. And the Greek Macedonian army charged through the Persian lines and penetrated Alexander in the lead all the way to the king's tent and camp behind the lines. Darius fled. His wife and family, including his mother, were captured and became prisoners of Alexander. And he treated them very chivalrously. They were terrified. They thought they might be victims of war and sold as slaves or mistreated. And he said, no. Don't worry. I will post guards around the tent. You will not be disturbed, and I will see to it that you receive the same supplies and treatment that Darius had been giving you. And they remained his prisoners for the next 3 or 4 years. Darius's wife was pregnant at the time. She died in childbirth about 6 months later. But his mother survived. But now that he's conquered Issus, this breaks open the path from Asia Minor to the whole Mediterranean coastline. And so he marches south through Phoenicia, all the way to Egypt, doesn't have to fight a battle there, takes control. He's actually 2 years on the march and taking over these former provinces of the Persian Empire. And then Darius has assembled another army. Alexander comes back north, and you see then we get to the third battle here in 331, Gaugamela. Alexander is 25 years old now, and successful campaign on his own against the Thracians up to a Danube, defeat of a Persian army at Granicus, defeat of the great king of Persia at Issus, and now the great king of Persia has come back again. Now he has an army of 150,000, 100,000 on foot, 50,000 on horse. Alexander's recruited as well. He has 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. They fight on the plains. This is actually up near what's now Mosul in the upper reaches of the Euphrates Valley. And the Persian casualties run somewhere between 20 and 50,000. We have a hard time sorting it out. Different historians give different figures. The Greek casualties are reported to be 1,500. And again, the Persians collapse in a chaotic rout. Darius runs for the hills, and he is eventually overthrown and made a captive by one of his own generals. And Alexander is now hot in pursuit He heads into Media and then south to Persia. This is modern-day Iran. Takes the capital of the Persian Empire. And, well, I'm going to hold off on the fourth battle here because we need to get what happens in between here. He chases King Darius, even after he's made prisoner, all the way up across the Himalayas into Central Asia. He's into the rivers that flowed into the Aral Sea. He's gone north along the banks of the Caspian. This is Afghanistan and Uzbekistan chasing Darius because he wants to be the king of Persia. And as long as Darius is alive, his claim to be the new great king of Persia is in doubt. He needs to either get Darius to surrender and abdicate and recognize him, or he needs to kill Darius. Well, as it turns out, as he approaches the wagon train where Darius is being held a prisoner, his own general kills him. There's a story that Alexander actually arrived before he had died, but was already mortally wounded. And Darius asked him for water and then closed his eyes and passed away. So now Alexander and his Macedonian warriors are in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. And now comes the most infamous episode in Alexander's life. Second anecdote, Alexander and Clytus, or Clytus. Clytus was an older warrior who had helped to train him. He had been an officer in his father's army. Alexander had fought with him at Thebes, had fought with him at Granicus. Actually, Clytus had saved Alexander's life in the Battle of Granicus. Alexander was surrounded and cut off and about to be killed, and Clytus killed the warrior who was attacking him. He and Clytus were very, very good friends. He's 20 years older, had been an officer in King Philip's army. He had known Alexander since he was 12. He might have been there the day Alexander tamed Bucephalus. Would have been an officer of 32. They had fought side by side for 10 years. Yeah, saved his life at the Battle of Granicus. So during a banquet, okay, this is the other thing about the Macedonians. This is why they remind me of the Scots. They like to drink. They party. I mean, they are a bardic redneck culture. They like to have a big fancy barbecue and drink a lot of beer. And everybody gets in their cups and they start insulting each other, and, you know, some things lead to fisticuffs and hangovers and all of that. So after having drinking, Clytus began criticizing Alexander, saying, what is all this stuff about Zeus Ammon? What do you mean Zeus Ammon? Why are you starting to wear Persian clothes? And why are you bragging about having conquered the world? It's your army that conquered the world. It's not you. You act like you did it all by yourself. It wasn't you all by yourself. It was your warriors from Macedonia. And you're not half the warrior your father was. Yeah. He accused Alexander of betraying Macedonian traditions, favoring Persian courtiers, taking sole credit for victories. Some accounts suggest Clytus also mocked Alexander's claim of divine descent from Zeus Ammon, which was a sensitive topic, as you might imagine. So Alexander loses his temper. He grabs a spear, hurls it at Clytus, and kills him. There are varying accounts that say Clytus had actually left the banqueting room and then come back with more insults. And it was when he came back with more insults that Alexander said, enough of this. He grabbed, one account says that Alexander's bodyguard had hidden his sword because they kind of knew where this was going. And he grabbed a spear from one of the other soldiers on guard and hurled it at Clytus. Yeah. He was then devastated. It's basically, he just lost his temper, and he was drunk. He was immediately overcome with guilt. All of the accounts agree. He withdrew to his tent. He refused food and drink. He mourned for days. He kept calling out Clytus's friend, Clytus's name. His other officers and friends worried that he might take his own life. Plutarch says he contemplated that. clutching the spear that killed Clitus and maybe thinking about just running through himself, his companions eventually persuaded him to end his self-imposed isolation. But almost everybody says he was never quite the same after that. There's a debate among the historians about what this incident means. The heavy drinking is a Macedonian custom. The banqueting and the banter are Macedonian custom. Again, I can't help but think of the Macedonians and the Greeks as the Scots and the English of the ancient world. This wasn't the first time that he had lost his temper, and with terrible results. Some modern scholars suggest that he was paranoid because there had been conspiracies. There had been rumors and some occasional talk that some disgruntled soldiers were going to kill him because they wanted to go home. Everybody agrees. Arrian, Plutarch, Curtius, Diodorus, they all agree on the basic details of what happened at the banquet. So we know this about Alexander, that he himself personally killed one of his officers, Clitus, whom he'd known and fought with. What happened afterwards and some of the details, we're not sure. But yeah, Alexander did kill one of his best friends. It was not a premeditated betrayal. It was a fit of anger. But it tells you something about him. And I could not help but put that in as a verse. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty. He who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Since I still believe that history is moral philosophy teaching by example. And this is the way Plutarch presents his life. There's a moral lesson to be learned from studying even the famous and successful. Okay, we get back to the course of things. He wins the battle of Hydaspes. Hang on, let me go back. I need to get that battle back up. So coming down out of Afghanistan, back south of the Himalayas, he fights the Indian king here. First time he's in, the Greek Macedonians have encountered war elephants, which they're a little intimidated by, but they are able to win the battle. King Porus is taken prisoner, brought to Alexander, and Alexander says, "How do you expect to be treated by me?" And King Porus says, "Like a king," which impresses Alexander. And Alexander does something interesting at this point. He says, "I give you back your kingdom as long as you acknowledge me as the great king and the emperor and pay me tribute every year. I will give you back your kingdom." And he does. I've mentioned the rebellion of his troops. Say, hey, we're 3,000 miles from home, and we've been gone for a long time. We want to go home. We're not going across this river. We're not going to go invade. We've conquered Persia. We're not going to invade India and conquer it. And he goes and sulks in his tent for 3 days, and then finally says, okay, fine. We'll go home. Goes back to Babylon. And third anecdote, because I'm getting close to my time here. I told you there was a connection between Alexander and Achilles. He had been given a copy of the Iliad by Aristotle. And his copy of the Iliad had Aristotle's annotations. So the Iliad's in 24 books. The book was not really yet invented. Everything's still on scrolls, so probably 24 scrolls. But Aristotle's handwritten notes on the Iliad, and it became his prized possession. And just like Bucephalus, he took his copy of the Iliad with him on his campaign. They say he had, when he captured the Persian capital, they brought him a richly ornamented wooden box that was probably, about 3 feet by 2 feet, and said, "Look what we found in the great king's possessions." And he said, "Oh, that's perfect." And he used it to store his copies of the Iliad. I said he slept with 2 things in his tent. He slept with the Iliad and a dagger under his pillow. But it was more than just admiring the account of the great warrior of the war on Troy. the richly ornamented box that was found in Darius's royal tent. He claimed descent from Achilles through his mother. This had been going on since he was a boy. It's one reason why Aristotle thought, well, I can teach him a thing or two because I know he likes Achilles. So I'll give him a copy of the Iliad. When he crossed over into Asia Minor, the first thing he did was go to visit the tomb of Achilles at Troy. And he offered sacrifice and then did the traditional pilgrimage thing, which baffles us moderns, but the traditional pilgrimage thing that Greek warriors did at the tomb of Achilles was to strip naked and run around the outside of the tomb 3 times. So Alexander does that. His mourning for Clytus is a bit like Achilles' mourning for his best friend. It wasn't killed by Achilles, it was killed by Hector. Hector, because Achilles was sulking in his tent, and his best friend put on his armor and went out to battle the Trojans, and Hector, the great Trojan hero, thinks it's Achilles out there in his armor, and so he attacks him and kills him. Patroclus, Achilles' best friend, and Achilles, of course, blames himself. And Achilles goes in his tent and just, is inconsolable for 3 days. There's that sulking in the tent again. And his reaction to the troops after the Battle of Hydaspes when they told him, hey, we're not going any further. That is all in some ways patterned after Homer's account. All right, there's a lot more that could be said. We have a rich array of sources. I want to talk a little bit about the impact. Hellenistic culture and the Greek successor states. Alexander did not found a dynasty. He had several wives and 1 child, but none of them survived to take over a government. His conquered territory immediately splintered, with his Greek generals, his Macedonian generals, each taking pieces. The most important one, I think, is the general Ptolemy, who had been with him all the way to Uzbekistan, came back and took Egypt. One general took Asia Minor. Someone went home to Macedonia and picked up the kingship there. There is this big, huge yellow expanse, which is the old Persian Empire, and General Seleucus took it, but he couldn't hold it. It shrank rapidly until it was just something, not even Babylon anymore, but just something based around Antioch. There was a Greek kingdom then based around Antioch. There was a Greek kingdom in Egypt. There was a Greek kingdom in Asia Minor. And that spreads the Greek language through all of that territory. Greek literature is copied and deposited in libraries. In many of these places where Alexander had conquered, he found cities, and some of his soldiers retire and become colonists. So there are Greek-speaking communities now scattered throughout the Persian Empire. Greek architecture, because he's got all the wealth of the Persian Empire and he uses it to build Greek temples to the Greek gods. You find them scattered now all through that former territory. Greek administrative structures. Now, it's not just Greek. He actually doesn't destroy the Persian structures. He just takes them over and puts his people in charge. But that idea of how do you administer a large kingdom? You delegate, you organize state, you have something like a federal system with different governors who report to the king. Ptolemy, I mentioned him. Ptolemy the first is the one who takes over Egypt. Ptolemy the second is the one who commissions a translation of the Jewish scriptures into Greek, because there is a Jewish community in Alexandria within 1 generation. So about 250 BC, this is just about 60 or 70 years after Alexander's death, there are Jewish scholars in Alexandria translating the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek. And that's the Old Testament version that the Jews begin to adopt and use. It's the writers of the 4 Gospels and Paul in his letters, when he quotes the Old Testament, he's very often quoting the Greek translation that was done in Egypt, in Alexandria. And I told you about the revival of the Parthian successor to the Persian Empire. There's Persepolis all the way over there on the right. You see above the Persian Gulf, that's the former capital. Oyas is the newer name for Babylon, all part of the Parthian Empire. And this Seleucid Empire is the successor state, General Seleucus. His descendants have their capital now at Antioch. And by 164 BC, the Romans, of course, have annexed Greece. Greece is now a province of the Roman Empire, but the Seleucid Empire is still existing. It's Greek rulers who are descended from Greek generals who had fought with Alexander, and the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt are descendants of the Greek general who fought with Alexander. And the boundary between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire is kind of in flux, and it's in that little space that there's a Jewish rebellion against the Greek garrisons that have been left. Sometimes the garrisons are from Ptolemy in Egypt. Sometimes the garrisons are from Seleucus in Antioch. And the Jews eventually rebel, and David and Goliath story, they win. They force the Greek soldiers to withdraw, and they establish an independent kingdom. They had been a province in the Persian Empire, and then they're a province in the Seleucid Empire, sometimes the Ptolemaic Empire. And now, for the first time since about 580 BC, they are again an independent nation. And they exist in that little space because there's flux. It's a border state, a buffer state between the Seleucid Empire, capital in Antioch, and the Ptolemaic Empire, capital in Alexandria. And that's the backdrop to the New Testament. We're only 150 years. Actually, in 63 BC, you have Herod taking over as the king of the Jews, which is going to be the subject of next month. Herod the Great, 73 BC to 4 BC. He's the son of an Idumean cavalry chief. He rose to rule Israel. He strengthened by alliances with Rome, rebuilt the Second Temple in Jerusalem, founded the port city of Caesarea Maritima, which is a bit of flattery to the Roman rulers, and whose brutal tactics earned him infamy. So we'll talk about him next week. But I couldn't talk about Herod if you didn't already know about Alexander and the Macedonian Empire. So, questions, comments? I made it. It is 7 o'clock.
Where was Antiochus Epiphanes? Was he a Seleucid?
Yes. He's one of the Greek Seleucid kings. He calls himself a king of kings. He's got presumptions trying to give himself the title of the great Persian king. And his capital is Antioch. And he is a descendant of that general of Alexander named General Seleucus. So 2 or 3 generations downstream, you have Antiochus Epiphanes. Yeah, who provokes the rebellion of the Jews. Because he tells them they all have to sacrifice to Zeus Ammon. And the Jews are like, not doing that. All right? Well, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how Rome kind of comes in and plays?
Come back next month.
Okay.
Because we'll have to do that when we talk about Herod. Because Herod's interactions with Rome are key, and they highlight the changes that have happened since the collapse of this temporary Greek empire, which falls apart into pieces. But the pieces continue to exist for another couple of centuries, and then the Romans overwhelm the mainland of Greece and the cities of Athens and Corinth. They don't even bother to make Athens the capital of their province. They make Corinth the capital of their province. Athens has become a backwater. Well, we'll talk about all of that next month. All right, thank you for coming. I hope that was informative and useful, and hope to see you again when we talk about Herod.